Top of the morning and welcome to our special coverage of the Russian invasion of Ukraine today. I'm Olumide Macaulay. The headlines. Russia says it thwarted Ukrainian drone attack in Belgorod as Ukraine accuses Russia of targeting Danube port in massive strike. UN chief, Britain's Prime Minister condemned Russian missile attack on Kupiansk as body count rises to 51. Plus, President Putin says Europe is erecting a new Iron Curtain against Russia to its own detriment. Thank you for joining us. Russia's defense ministry is just reporting that its air defenses foiled a Ukrainian drone attack late Thursday over the southwest Belgorod region. In a statement, the ministry said 5 Ukrainian attack drones were destroyed. In a separate post on Telegram, Belgorod Governor Vyacheslav Gladkov claimed air defenses shot down 6 drones over the region. There were no reports of casualties or damage. Russia launched what Ukraine's southern defense forces describe as a massive drone attack overnight, hitting port infrastructure and damaging a grain storage facility in the Danube River in Odessa. Head of the Odessa Region Military Administration, Ole Kipper, has suspended ferry crossings following the attack on Izmail district near the Romanian border. The fire was extinguished and there were no casualties. Ukrainian air defenses destroyed 11 drones in the south overnight, including 3 over Odessa and 8 over Mykolaiv, the southern defense forces described. Russian strikes injured at least 9 people in the northeastern city of Kharkiv, a day after Moscow forces killed dozens of people in a nearby village in one of the deadliest attacks against civilians of the war. An 11-month-old child was amongst those wounded. Also, several cars caught on fire and buildings were damaged. The death toll after a Russian attack on a memorial service in a village in northeastern Ukraine has risen to 51. Large piles of bricks and shattered metal and building material remain where the cafe and shop were hit early in the afternoon in Roza village in Kharkiv region. The attack is the deadliest there since Russia's invasion more than 19 months ago and appears to be one of the biggest civilian death tolls in any single Russian strike. Rescue workers carried white body bags in a field next to a children's playground and loaded them on trucks. President Vladimir Zelensky, who was attending a summit with European leaders in Spain, said that the Russian terror shall be stopped. The United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres is strongly condemning the Russian attack on the Ukrainian village on Thursday. Speaking on his behalf to reporters in New York, UN spokesman Stefan Dujarric decried the attack on civilians. A Russian missile slammed into a cafe and a grocery store in a village in northeastern Ukraine on Thursday, reducing the building to rubble and killing 51 people as they held a memorial service.
The Secretary General strongly condemns today's attack, which reportedly killed at least 49 people and injured several others in the Kupiansk district of the Kharkiv region of Ukraine. Attacks against civilians and civilian infrastructure are prohibited under international humanitarian law, and they must stop immediately. The Secretary General extends his condolences to the families of the victims and wishes a prompt recovery to all those injured.
British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak is also condemning the attack as horrific. After the meeting with President Zelensky at the summit of the European Capital Community in Spain, Sunak told reporters the attack illustrates Russia's barbarity. Russia has denied deliberately targeting civilians. Many have been killed in missile strikes, drone attacks, and shelling.
Well, I've just come from meeting President Zelensky where we discussed this horrific attack that has just happened. It just illustrates Russia's barbarity, and President Putin can say all he likes. There is one person responsible for this illegal, unprovoked war, and it is him, and he should stop. And that's why the UK has been steadfast in supporting Ukraine and will continue to do so. I'm proud that we were one of the first and now one of the largest supporters of Ukraine. That will continue to be the case. But what I've seen also at this summit is widespread support for the Ukrainians, not just for today, but into the future as well.
Meanwhile, that is British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, beg your pardon. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says it was no blind strike and Russian troops could not have been unaware of where they were striking. According to him, in his nightly address, the missile strike on the village in Kharkiv region on an ordinary store and cafe was deliberate. Russia's President Vladimir Putin is warning that Europe is shutting off Russia with a new Iron Curtain. He added that Western sanctions on Moscow over Ukraine had hurt the European economy, while the U.S. and Asian economies had become more competitive. President Putin, who said Russia itself was not shutting itself from Europe, was speaking during a question and answer session at the Valdaya Discussion Club in Sochi. Meanwhile, according to President Putin, Ukraine has lost more than 90,000 troops since the start of the counteroffensive in early June. He also claims Kiev has lost 557 tanks and approximately 1,900 armored vehicles. We now speak with Program Coordinator, Institute for Advanced Studies in Berlin, Germany, Victoria Sarita. Ms. Sarita is joining us virtually from Germany. It's good to have you. Dobro ranko, welcome to the program.
Dobro ranko, morning.
Could we begin with condolences to your Ukrainian? So obviously, we'd like to express our sincere condolences concerning this latest incident where 51 people have perished in the cafe in the Rosa village near Kharkiv. The Russians say that these sorts of attacks are not deliberate. Do you believe them?
I don't believe in that because we know there was currently another one very deadly in Chernihiv, where there was also a meeting of people which were not civilians, and the theater was hit. This time we have a cafe, and unfortunately we have a situation when practically every family in the village was present in the funeral, so every family has losses.
Are you still with us?
Yes.
Okay, right. So would you be open to giving them the benefits of the doubt in the case where this is a civilian casualty in many numbers? Because in the case of, correct me the correct pronunciation of the village, Konistyanki, or Konistyansk, where certain people died, dozens of people died, and the New York Times said upon investigation that it was a misfire from the Ukrainian side that killed the people in that particular area. Would it be plausible that at times these Russian targets miss that particular objective and go and hit somewhere else they didn't mean to do in the first place?
Of course, it depends on the type or range of missiles they are using, because if they are using for their attacks old Soviet missiles, they quite often are not precise. So they might be targeting one elements of infrastructure, and unfortunately a lot of civilian infrastructure is hit in around. But if we are talking about drones, they are much more precise. So if it was a drone attack, then it is hardly to assume that they were aiming some specific military infrastructure in the surrounding, and then by chance they hit the wrong spot, We also had another case. There are many cases when they hit cafes where people are or civilians are gathered. There were a few months ago another cafe hit where a lot of Ukrainian civilians and people with kids were, and actually a famous Ukrainian young writer was present with some international delegation. So unfortunately, I'm afraid these are issues. Maybe someone is misreporting Russian side that this is the gathering of Ukrainian military or some military character, and then they are hitting those places.
The case of the journalist you speak of, the female writer, I beg your pardon, and whether it's deliberate or not, this wouldn't have happened if this war had not transpired in the first place, and it continues. President Vladimir Putin in Sochi said something yesterday where he was talking about the war, and he says he's given an impression in that meeting that, and I'm going to quote him here, he says that we did not start the so-called war, we're trying to stop it. Later on, he said, what right does the United States have to lecture other countries? So President Putin, from the get-go, from the beginning, has been given this impression that his hand was forced. He didn't really want to go to into this conflict. The eventual failure of the Minsk agreements, the first one and the second one, and other subsequent occurrences led him to take this action. Now, everyone is taking that with a pinch of salt, but could you give us an understanding of why he's saying that?
He, during the same summit, said that actually this is not the conflict of the lands, but this is conflict of the principles. And then we can question what type of principles he has in mind. And then he continues and he says that this is about new international order. So here I assume that he gives a right, in his mind, reason why they attacked Ukraine, because they want to be a superpower and they want a new international order. And then he continues saying that United Nations is a problematic, and current international law are also very problematic. So we have to re-establish everything. And in this case, he claims possibility to new international or global order where Russia should play the key role, and Russia would decide on, I don't know, international law or international communities, how they live together. And for me, this gives an absolute answer to your question.
Right. Yeah, so in other words, he's seeking a change in the global balance of the world powers, and he wants Russia to be number one, right? Yes, and it could be Ukraine. We also observe what is happening, for example, currently in Nagorno-Karabakh, yes, where Russia was, Russian troops were supposed to be peacekeeping contingent supporting Armenia. And as soon as Armenia claimed pro-European stances, Russia abandoned Armenia completely and started to blame them that they are supporting Europe and so on. And they didn't support Armenians in this last conflict. So now we observe what does it mean that as soon as you do not comply with what Russia wishes for itself, then these countries become defenseless, even though for years and years Russia was claiming that they are defending and they are a friendship and everything. Indeed, that so Armenian... Go on, please. So all treaties are broken and promises are broken. That Armenian situation could be a red flag, another one. But you're in Berlin, in Germany, and we reported the other day about protests going on against NATO's involvement in the war, criticizing very harshly that NATO is not helping, they're adding fuel to the fire. What can you tell us about the dissent against the war in Germany?
These are very different groups, and we all, in European countries and in democratic countries, you always have rallies for different sides and different parties. But just to give you the way how certain slogans were presented, that let's stop Germany involvement because we don't want Germany to find pro-Ukraine and to be against NATO. And nobody is thinking that Germany is actually part of NATO. So how can Germany be attacked by NATO or be pro or contra NATO if Germany is very much part of the bloc? So those people who are rallying, they are repeating strange Russian formulas quite often without even thinking what they are talking about or what they are presenting during those rallies.
An incident happened in eastern Ukraine, in Horolivka, where it appears cluster munition killed a teenager and injured 3 others. This was in the area controlled by the Russians. The leader of that area gave a warning that people should not pick up these cluster munitions. It reminds and is reminiscent of the booby traps of the 1960s in Vietnam, where the Viet Cong set up these horrible, horrendous booby traps that maimed people for life. But now that these cluster munitions are being used by the Ukrainians inside Ukraine, and with the long-term implications, are you concerned?
Of course, everybody is concerned. Everybody is concerned for many things, for proliferation of weapons, because you do have incidents in the cities from time to time as well, when someone is shooting themselves or in public, or you have grenades exploding. So this will be an issue for many years for Ukraine. First of all, proliferation of weapons, control of weapons, but also demining, because currently Ukraine is a country with the highest number mines ever on the territory of the country. So these issues should be discussed publicly, and this with what concerns Ukrainians a lot, because Ukrainians were not used to this situation previously.
Speaking of what is concerning as well, does this concern you concerning the situation in the United States and aid to Ukraine? There seems to be a situation that is developing where it is possible that aid from the United States could not be as certain as previously considered because of the infighting in the Republican Party, the United States Congress, which remains unresolved at this time.
Yes, this concerns Ukrainians, and there were already comments on the side of the military commanders that if the military support will be stopped completely, then they will have very limited possibility on the front line. But at the same time, the situation was predictable if someone would follow what is happening in US and would follow the fights over future presidential position. And we also have comments on the side of the White House that they are looking for different possibilities, and they have a system of possible grant giving, or they will try to revive the Lend-Lease agreement, which was signed but which was not used because there were other possibilities. So they are looking for possibilities to overcome this limitation and still support Ukraine. At the same time, we have to remember that we already discussed that this offensive will gradually be on hold during to the weather conditions, and weather is already changing in Ukraine. So maybe this would be the time for Ukraine to slowly collect weapons for the next season when the offense would be possible in spring. And maybe by that time, Ukraine will also have flight jets.
It's a difficult question, but doesn't that play into Russia's hands?
Yes, definitely it does. But
so, go on, please.
Unfortunately, we are in the situation where we don't have a choice because we cannot stop fighting. And there were a lot of military analysis saying that we have to be ready for the protracted conflict.
But even if the United States aid wanes or worst case scenario is diminished to a very significant degree, Sweden, for instance, just promised $200 million in worth of military aid. And the Germans are there. The UK remains committed. You heard Rishi Sunak saying that they will be with Ukraine for as long as it takes. Is the US aid for Ukraine the principal thing?
So far it was, but maybe if situation will be critical, we don't know who will be the next US president, then maybe Europe will have to take over. We know that exactly Britain, for example, and Germany are the second largest countries supporting Ukraine. Unfortunately, they were claiming that they cannot keep up at the moment with the speed and need for weapon delivery in Ukraine. But if there will be a pause in offensive, maybe they will also be able to catch up a little bit with the production.
Okay, so as it stands, concerning the peace efforts in Granada, in Spain, we see talks continuing about the defense of Ukraine and the counteroffensive and NATO and other issues and the need for ammunition. Is everyone giving up on peace?
No. What we hear and know that in few days, Turkey will host the peace talks without Russia, but with many international community presence, and especially with many countries from the global south present there. So again, we see that Turkey is trying to play a role or at least to be a base for some negotiations. And I think this is very important because Ukraine needs different possibilities, different platforms where the future peace treaty can or future peace agreement will be taking shape. And I do believe that it's very important that not only European countries play a leading role, but we'll be discussing the new global order, what Vladimir Putin aspires at, but a more secure one, which would include other countries from other parts of the globe.
You know, it seems an intractable situation because of the considerations of the Ukrainians, where especially in the area of Crimea, it seems to be, you can enlighten us further. President Zelensky says Crimea is part of Ukraine, but he's saying now that they're taking Crimea back as they are taking the other recently occupied regions of Ukraine back. In any concessions for peace to happen, will Ukraine do you think Ukraine is open to making any concessions whatsoever?
I think this is important to discuss what Vladimir Putin says, because if it's about principles, then the question is, whatever concessions will be made, they would never ever be final, because in principle, Ukraine will still exist. And what he claims that Ukraine should live according to completely different principles. And exactly yesterday, there was another important talk, trying to warn European or international community that this is not that Ukraine doesn't want to talk about concessions or doesn't want to talk about the peace. By Alexandra Matvichuk. She was, together with other colleagues from Belarus and Russia, received the Nobel Prize for Peace last year. And she was saying that you have to understand that I'm collecting evidence about the atrocities committed by Russia beginning from 2014. And concessions does not mean for those people on those territories that this is simply one regime or one state and we exchange flags and there is another state and they have a normal life within the new state. But what is happening on all those territories, and we have a lot of evidence of that there are atrocities, there are kidnapping, they are taking kids, they are torturing, they're killing, we have mass graves of civilians and so on. So how is it possible to decide that we are not fighting for those people and live with understanding that these tortures are continuing and people are really suffering there? And this is an important moment. So this is also, if we are fighting for lives because someone decides that this is his new principles and new world order, then unfortunately Ukraine doesn't have a chance.
Finally, speaking of the children, and one must really feel for these children and minors, some of whom have been made to leave their country with their parents, some of whom are still in Ukraine. We hear of new underground schools that are being built so that schooling can go on in the midst of this crisis. The Ukrainian children are very important to the Ukrainian people for obvious reasons, and the indoctrination of the Ukrainian children who were taken by President Putin for reasons, according to him, for their own safety, is another problem entirely altogether. What's your position on that particular development?
Unfortunately, it is happening, and we had teenagers who came and they were witnessing what were their experiences after they were returned to Ukraine. But we also have to say that there is a stereotypical imagination that those who are outside of the country, who are refugees in other countries, they are more or less safe and in more or less good positions. But again, just recently new data came that because of the language issue, because of many other issues and stress, and so a lot of those kids are falling back in schools. They are not really able to keep up with the programs there, which might create a lot of social and structural issues for them, even in European countries. And the same, imagine if there was a COVID and now this is the second year of the war, and you have either online schooling or you have to attend schools in the shelters. And we are envisaging that this will continue to the next year. This is a very big issue about the new generation of Ukrainians, both on occupied territories, those who were taken as a hostages to other Russian families, and in Ukraine and outside of Ukraine. So this is a very big issue.
Indeed, very difficult times. Indeed, we pray and hope for a speedy resolution to this conflict, and we thank you for being on the program today and your insight. Victoria Sarida, Program Coordinator, Institute for Advanced Studies, who joined us from Berlin. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you for the invitation. Have a nice day.
You too. Welcome to The Soul. For more stretch of today's coverage of Russian invasion of Ukraine, the president of Ukraine, Vladimir Zelensky, is urging Europe to support the United States during what he calls a tough period. A dispute among the Republican majority in the U.S. House of Representatives has complicated budget negotiations and prompted President Joe Biden, who's a Democrat, to go from confidence that a deal will be made on Ukraine aid to openly expressing concern. Speaking to the media on the sidelines of a summit on the European political community in Spain, President Zelensky says the situation with the United States is dangerous, but Ukraine is ready for any tough period.
The situation with the United States is dangerous. Yes, it's a tough period for the United States, and of course it's a tough period for Ukraine, but since first days of full-scale war, we didn't have easy time. So we are ready for any tough period. For us, it's very important. Europe and the United States also have to be ready to work together this period, not to lose this unity. We give time to time, but very often we give this information. And I think my signals today have been to European leaders that really United States supported Europe, supported Ukraine during a long time. It's true. And Europe supported Ukraine. But I think that is time now, time of challenges. Challenges when Europe has like a strong leader in the world. Europe is the strong leader in the world. Europe has now to support the United States. Yes, but I'm thankful to President, to Congress. I know that we have bipartisan support. I see these challenges, but I hope that, again, United States, Europe will be together with Ukraine, and I think we will help to go out from this crisis.
President of Ukraine, Vladimir Zelensky. Now, prior to that, he had met with several European leaders on Thursday at the European Political Community Summit in Granada, a forum established last year following Russia's invasion of Ukraine to foster cooperation amongst more than 40 countries from Norway to Albania. He met with French President Emmanuel Macron, German Chancellor Olaf Scholz, and British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, who restated their commitment to Ukraine after political turbulence in both the U.S. and Europe raised questions about continued support. Individual countries also made pledges in Granada. Support in Europe has appeared less rock solid after pro-Russian former Prime Minister Robert Fico won an election in Slovakia last weekend on pledges to end military aid to Ukraine. Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu and Chief of the General Staff General Valery Gerasimov held a meeting with the commanders of troops fighting in Ukraine on Thursday. It was not immediately clear where the meeting took place. The ministry broadcast footage of the meeting at which Shoigu addressed the training of service personnel and volunteers in reserve units. He said he'd inspected such regiments in Russia's southern military district on Thursday. Meanwhile, Russia is planning a naval base on the Black Sea coast of the breakaway Georgian region of Abkhazia. The leader of the region was quoted as saying this in their newspaper a day after meeting President Vladimir Putin. The president of the Russian-backed breakaway region, Aslan Zania, said an agreement had been signed for a permanent naval base in the Chomachira region. Russia recognized Abkhazia and another breakaway region, South Ossetia, as independent states in 2008, after Russian troops repelled a Georgian attempt to retake South Ossetia in a 5-day war, which ended on August 12, 2008. The Wall Street Journal reported that Russia had withdrawn the bulk of its Black Sea fleet from its main base in the next Crimea due to Ukrainian attacks. Russia made no immediate comment. German police and customs officers searched several properties in southern Germany belonging to a Russian national in relation to assets frozen under European Union sanctions. Sources say Russian oligarch Alisher Usmanov was the target of the operation. A legal representative for Usmanov, a Russian Uzbek businessman who was sanctioned in the wake of Russia's invasion of Ukraine on February the 24th last year, had no immediate comment. The German Customs Authority's Special Commission claimed to be acting on court search warrants. It said it could not give further details on the operation for tactical reasons. And joining us this morning is security consultant, Mr. Onyekachi Adekoya. Mr. Adekoya speaking to us virtually from Lagos, southwest Nigeria. Good morning and thank you for being with us.
Good morning, Olumide. Thank you for having me, and good morning to the viewers.
Can you make head or tail of what President Volodymyr Zelensky means when he says that Europe should support the United States, as the possible waning of aid from the United States is a possibility? What does he mean?
Well, I'm not sure what he means. We probably have to ask him, but I'm sure he's also alluding to the difficulties and the growing resentment to the war in the US and the fact that we are now fast approaching 2024, and the issue is becoming a very touchy issue in the internal democracy of the US. A recent poll conducted, I think, by CNN shows that at least half the majority of Americans do not support further funding the war. And if you look at the ouster of Kevin McCarthy in the US and the frontline runner-ups to replace him, not further funding the war in Ukraine has become a topical issue upon which they are even campaigning. I think President Zelensky can read in between the lines and know that the days ahead are quite difficult. We must remember that the US government solely funds about 150,000 civil servants, pays virtually for the military of Ukraine. So without further funding for Ukraine, I'm not sure where the funding will come from. Germany doesn't have much to give. The UK has said that much themselves. You have a Slovakian prime minister who campaigned on non-funding of the Ukraine war. I mean, Viktor Orban and Hungary, it's already a given. Then you have Italy also, who's pretty much undecided. The cost of the war in Europe has been very significant. It's causing a lot of crises. Just even you heard from Netherlands. The Netherlands are now having a housing crisis because the number of immigrants have taken from this war. So I think he's pretty much trying to rally Europe. But the question now is, what is the need for Europe? Europe is buying more, paying more for gas, I think at a 30% premium, having to buy from the US. Germany has lost its competition with China, and Europe is gradually losing face in the global competitive market. So there's enough cause for concern for President Zelensky. And so I'm thinking that by that statement, he's trying to rally Europe to say that now is not a good time to not support the war. I think in the Vladimir conference, President Putin alluded to the fact that if the funding from the US stops, Ukraine may likely collapse in under a week of fighting. So I think those are the concerns perhaps President Zelensky was trying to speak to.
Yes, and possibly he was also trying to say that Europe should maintain their support for Ukraine, and if there was anything any of the leaders could do to aid President Biden, maybe they could do that. Do you think that the United States Congress is losing touch with the American people? Because it is quite clear that there is bipartisan support for the Ukrainian offensive. And in the ouster of Kevin McCarthy, it was just 8 Republicans it took to join the Democrats for them to do that. So most of the Republican congressmen were in support of Kevin McCarthy. But it went on to be a deeper scenario where it's being touted and claimed that these people aren't putting America first, they're putting other countries first, and America has their own problems, therefore we should take care of America's problems first. And what happened in Slovakia. Is there a global shift away and a global sentiment shifting away from Ukraine?
Yeah, Olumide, you must understand that wars are very expensive. And once you peel off the propaganda from war, you will find out that at the heart of every war, beyond the propaganda, is a struggle for resource. So this war had been touted as a war of democracy. But the longer this war wanes on, the more people begin to ask questions. For example, in the US, you have the border crisis, which is now having a bit of blowback. And I'm sure you have seen that President Biden has circled back. He was against the wall that Trump was building. Now there's somewhat consensus that that wall must be built. And again, he's doing that because the crisis is there and it's staring everyone in the face. At the other leg of this is the fact that China just added 1.5 trillion to its GDP within the same period where the US has just added about $2 trillion of debt to its national debt stock. You look at the tilt towards Asia, you look at what is strategically at stake in Ukraine, which I will come to, and you look at the cost of the war so far. On paper, over $120 billion on paper, but this war has been funded since 2008 in preparing for this conflict leading up to 2014. So a lot has gone into the war. And I think that the failure of the recent counteroffensive also plays a role in some of the resentment you see, because Ukraine has only recovered about 0.01% of the territories and lost about 90,000 soldiers since June, since the start of its counteroffensive. So people are beginning to ask the questions, what is this war truly about? And, should we be sacrificing so much? I recently returned from Europe, and there's a cost of living crisis in Europe. There's a housing crisis. There's an economic recession looming in Europe, and everyone is asking, all for what? What is the cost? What is the true cost, and what are we fighting for? So you expect to see, I mean, the AfD in Germany is being to look like the party that is likely to win the next election because, there's some resentment to the cost. It's not as much as a support for Ukraine, but what it is costing the ordinary European citizen and the citizen in America. The case in America is a bit dicey because America is a continent. Most Americans are far removed from what is happening in the international domain. So until it begins to impact on them directly, you don't get so much blowback from the public. And that gives the policy framers a lot of leeway to do what they feel is best for America. But there's an inflation crisis there, cost of living crisis, the Feds are raising rates, so it's this whole war effort is beginning to pinch because at the heart of the war is this global spat between the commodity centers and those who are like, who fuel the economy on quantitative easing, which is just an euphemism for saying printing of money. So you have excess fiat currency, you have disruption in global supply chain, which is leading to a commodity scarcity, and that is impacting on people's pockets. And so I don't think that people are no longer sensitive to the plight of the Ukrainian because over 500,000 soldiers have died so far, but at what cost? And then they begin to ask the why. So it's a number of issues for Americans to deal with when you look at the border crisis, inflation, cost of their mortgage, the cost of living, and the fact that there is no seeming end in sight. And for any smart opposition politician, you can take the Biden government to task on how well it has done on the economy. And also layer this against the fact that you see subtly that the Saudis have voluntarily offered to reduce their production by 1 million barrels per day, crude production. Russia, I think, about 300,000 barrels per day. And what you now see is a steady upsurge in the price of crude. Every time the price of crude goes up or comes down, that's a geopolitical weapon in its own self. It does look like those on the side of the commodity super cycle we see are synchronizing their policies to make this war even more costly for the West. So yes, there are a number of issues, and these issues are converging. And if you look at the cycle and psychology of war, we're at that point where now people's interests begin to wane, and then the human mind wants to move on. At this point in time, there are more people for peace than for war, because war is costly. It's costly to everybody. So I think those are the number of issues that are at play before we then get into what is really at stake in Ukraine and why was this war launched in the first instance. So that's a bit of a background to why you see this small tilt, because this whole Ukrainian crisis has cost the Canadian their speaker. I mean, America has also lost its speaker. A number of governments have been flipped in Europe. A number of governments are at risk of being flipped, even that of the American government also. So there's a lot at stake for the politicians in this war. And we're at that point where it's becoming rather tenuous to continue to support a full funding of the war rather than pursuing a peace.
True, it did cost the Canadians their speaker. And this must be the war fatigue that the Russians are counting on, to which they've alluded and actually said that it's going to happen and it's just a matter of time. But something happened just this morning, just came out, that President Putin himself announced that in the investigations of the death of Yevgeny Prigozhin in the plane crash, that it appears that these investigations seem to show that hand grenades were used in that incident. If he is the one that is behind that matter, as many people have accused him of, why will he be bringing it up now?
You know, the information domain is a domain of warfare. Some have argued that a typical Putin doesn't carry out some of those cleanups in the way that this has happened, and so therefore it is not Putin. Permit the word cleanup, I'm just trying to be sensitive.
Yes.
Because we have not also forgotten the case of Jamal Khashoggi, and which again strained the relationship between the US and the Saudis when Biden promised to make the Saudis a pariah state. These have come and gone. That's another kettle of fish now. So those cleanups are not ordered by Putin in that manner. It's either, you know, by subtle means. And then the other school of thought is that, yes, because if it is uncharacteristic, then you cannot trace it back to Putin. And that's all in the realm of speculation. But just to say that Prigozhin had many enemies, even in Ukraine, even in the Russian GRU, even within the oligarchs, as he had many friends, even among enemies among the Europeans. So there were a number of people calling for Ukraine, for Prigozhin's head. The attempted coup in Moscow did not help his profile in any way. So his risk profile went up significantly. So there could have been a number of actors that could have been influenced to take that action. And clearly it's important to also remark that if it was an explosion that happened from within the aircraft, it then deals a blow to the myth that he was taken out by a surface to air missile system, which was the initial claim. But as you have seen, the news cycle in this war is very interesting. It says one thing, like the shelling of that happened at the cafe in Kupiansk, where it was claimed that it's the Russians. There are a number of facts that we're beginning to see emerge that perhaps it may not have been the Russians. But again, that attack, as with several other attacks, seemed to align with the timing of President Zelensky's visit to Europe, particularly when it's on appeal. So some of those attacks will make Russia look a bit more bad and justify the cost. So it's difficult to wonder that a president would do that to his own people to gain. But this is war. All they say perhaps is fair, whether it is propaganda, positive or negative. There's a lot of things cycling out there in the informational space. But just to say on this Prigozhin matter, he had so many enemies. It could have been just about anybody, but it's important that the facts are coming out that it was an attack from within the aircraft. So somebody must have been motivated. There are different ways to motivate someone to suicide within statecraft. So that's what the investigation is pointing towards. And then we're also keen on hearing more about what happened so we can make fair sense of it. But definitely Prigozhin had a lot of enemies.
Indeed. So this is a case of beyond the usual suspects. We thank you for being with us this morning and your insight, Mr. Onyekachi Adekoya, security consultant who joined us from here in Lagos.
Thank you.
Finally, Russian President Vladimir Putin is suggesting that it was not an external attack that crashed the plane carrying Wagner warlord Yevgeny Prigozhin in August, but hand grenades within the aircraft. Speaking at the Valdaya Forum in Sochi, Mr. Putin said the chairman of the investigative committee just reported a few days ago that the fragments of hand grenades were found in the bodies of the victims. Prigozhin, who led a failed uprising against the Kremlin, was amongst the 10 people on board the private plane, which crashed in a field northwest of Moscow in August en route to St. Petersburg. All on board, including Prigozhin and his top aides, were killed. The Russian leader, whose government has denied involvement in the crash, did not detail how grenades might have exploded on the plane, but said investigators should have reported drug or alcohol tests on the bodies of the victims. The crash came 2 months to the day after Prigozhin's attempted mutiny against Russia's military leadership, which posed the biggest challenge, according to some, to President Putin's rule in decades. And that's it for today's coverage of Russian invasion of Ukraine. I'm Olumide Macaulay. Thank you for watching. Have a great weekend.